She was carrying a tray of champagne when she heard her own painting sell for $500,000. Not a stumble, not a gasp. Sienna Adebayo kept her chin level, her tray steady, and her face so perfectly composed that the man who reached for a glass smiled at her like she was furniture. She smiled back. That was the job. Blend in, stay invisible, get out. The bidding paddle came down and the auctioneer's voice rang through the gilded hall like a bell. 201C sold for 20A9 580 million 201D. And somewhere behind Sienna's ribs, something tightened into a fist. 580 million won. She had been paid 1.5 million won for that painting 6 weeks ago. Mr. Lim had come to her apartment with a black bag and an expression that suggested he was doing her a favour, and she had taken the money because Maya needed new shoes, and the heating bill was 3 weeks overdue, and pride, she had learned, was a luxury that single mothers in foreign cities could not always afford. She kept walking, tray up, eyes forward. The room smelled of expensive perfume and old money and the particular confidence of people who had never once in their lives had to be invisible. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is just getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Sienna was almost at the service door when the room changed. She felt it before she heard it. That specific shift in atmosphere when a crowd that was humming suddenly goes quiet. She turned her head just slightly, just enough. A man in the front row had risen to his feet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Jae-won-oh spoke, rooms listened, not because he was loud, but because something in his tone suggested that whatever came after the silence was going to matter. He was 28 years old, and he stood like someone who had been the most dangerous person in every room he had ever entered, and had simply stopped being surprised by it. He addressed the auctioneer directly. He had reason, he said, to question the provenance of the piece that had just sold. He would like the original artist, the real original artist, to identify themselves, if they were in the room. He paused. He believed they were in the room. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes something irreversible. Sienna did not move. She was 12 feet from the service door. She was holding a tray with 4 champagne glasses on it. She was wearing a uniform that belonged to a catering company that did not know her real name. There was absolutely no reason for anyone in this room to look at her. And then Jae-won-oh turned his head. Not a scan of the room. Not a general survey. He turned and looked at the exact spot where she was standing with the particular precision of someone who had already done his homework and was now simply confirming what he already knew. Their eyes met for 3 seconds. Sienna set the tray down on the nearest surface, turned and walked through the service door like she had somewhere to be. She was through the kitchen and out the back exit, and moving down the Gangnam side street before she let herself breathe. The night air hit her face. Cold, sharp, real. She walked fast without running because running draws attention, and she had spent 3 years perfecting the art of disappearing without looking like she was trying to. Her phone buzzed. Da-eun. She picked up on the first ring. Sienna. Da-eun's voice was 3 notes too high. There are 2 men outside your building. They've been there for 40 minutes. Black suits. No phones out. Just waiting. Sienna stopped walking. She stood on that Seoul pavement with the city blazing around her and did the math in her head the way she always did. Fast, cold, unsentimental. She thought about Maya asleep in their apartment. She thought about the service exit she had just used. She thought about the man in the front row who had looked at her like a conclusion he had already reached. She turned around and walked back to the apartment anyway. Because there was nowhere else to go. Because Maya was there. And because Sienna Adebayo had learned a long time ago that the only thing more dangerous than walking toward trouble was letting trouble come to you while you were standing still. She pushed open the building door. The 2 men in the hallway looked at her without surprise. They stepped aside. She walked between them, unlocked her apartment, and checked on Maya first. Deeply asleep, one arm around a stuffed bear. Perfectly safe. Sienna exhaled. She picked up the heaviest thing within reach, which was a ceramic mug her daughter had painted for her birthday, and she turned to face the door. It opened before she could decide what she was going to do with the mug. Jaewon. Oh stepped inside her apartment like he had been there before. He looked at the mug in her hand. He looked at her face. Something moved in his expression that might, in another life, have been amusement. "You left quickly," he said. "You were staring at me," Sienna said. "In a room full of people. I don't like being stared at. Most people don't run. Most people don't have a reason to." He looked around the apartment slowly. The canvases stacked against the wall, the paint-stained table, the small pair of shoes by the door, the stack of bills on the counter she had forgotten to hide. He took it all in without comment. That was somehow worse than commentary. "I need something from you," he said. "I don't do requests," Sienna said. "You do now." He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on her kitchen counter. A painting. Old, luminous, achingly beautiful, and, to anyone else in the world, completely lost to history. There is one person in Seoul who can recreate this. Possibly one person in the world. He looked at her. "We both know who that is." "And if I say no?" Sienna said. Jaewon-oh buttoned his jacket. He moved toward the door with the unhurried ease of a man who had never once in his life needed to repeat himself. "I'll be here at 6 in the morning," he said. "Be ready." The door clicked shut. Sienna stood in her kitchen in the silence he left behind. She looked at the photograph on the counter. She looked at Maya's shoes by the door. She looked at the bills she hadn't hidden in time. She sat down on the floor. Not because her legs gave out, because sometimes the weight of a situation is better processed from the ground up. She pressed her back against the cabinet and stared at the ceiling and thought, with the precise, unsentimental clarity of a woman who had survived hard things before and knew exactly what surviving cost, that she had absolutely no way out of this one. From the bedroom, Maya's small voice drifted out, half asleep and unhurried. "Ioma, the light is still on." "I know, baby. Go back to sleep." She sat on that floor for a long time. "Don't go anywhere, because what happens when morning comes will change everything. Drop a comment right now and tell me, would you have opened that door?" 6 o'clock came the way bad things always do. Exactly when you expected it, and somehow still too soon. Sienna had not slept. She had packed one bag for herself and one for Maya, because packing 2 bags felt like hope, and hope in a situation like this was just another word for preparation. She had stood in the bathroom mirror for 3 full minutes and given herself the same speech she had given herself at 19 when she boarded a one-way flight to a country where she didn't speak the language, alone and $20 short of terrified. "You have survived every hard day so far. Your record is 100%. Keep going." Maya woke up asking where they were going. Sienna told her they were staying somewhere new for a while. Maya asked if it had a garden. Sienna said she didn't know. Maya said that was okay and went back to her cereal with the magnificent indifference of a 5-year-old who had decided that wherever her mother was, that was the only geography that mattered. Sienna stood at the counter watching her daughter eat and felt the weight of that trust, like a hand pressed flat and steady against her chest. At exactly 6 o'clock, a black car appeared outside. The compound sat above the Han River, like it had been placed there deliberately, by someone who wanted to look down at the rest of Seoul and feel every inch of the distance. All clean stone and floor-to-ceiling glass, and the kind of curated silence that announced, without apology, that the noise of ordinary life did not belong here. As the car moved through the first gate, Sienna counted cameras. Through the second gate, she counted guards. She reached 14 cameras before she stopped, because the number was doing something unhelpful to her breathing, and she needed her breathing to stay even. Maya pressed her face against the car window. "Are we living here now?" Sienna didn't answer. They were met at the entrance by Sung-min, Jae-won's right hand, a man built like a decision that had already been made, who looked at Sienna with the expression of someone who had been fully briefed on her and found the briefing somewhat inadequate. He showed them to a bedroom that would have cost a fortune anywhere else in the city. He showed Sienna the studio, every supply she could have dreamed of in the years she'd been mixing pigments in her bathroom sink. He showed her, last of all, the main gate. He pressed his palm to the biometric panel, and the gate swung open, and he looked at her and let the silence do the rest. "Mr. O will see you at 9, he said. Then he left. That night, after Maya was asleep, Sienna walked every corridor of the compound. She tried 6 doors. She found a window on the east side that looked climbable if you were willing to drop 8 feet into a hedge and deal with whatever waited on the other side of the perimeter wall. She made a plan. She always made a plan. Having a plan, even a flawed one, was the difference between a situation and a surrender. The first attempt came 3 days later. The service entrance, around the back, where the delivery trucks came in twice a week. She had spent 2 days watching the pattern, timing the gaps, memorizing which guard rotated when. She dressed Maya in her brightest jacket, because if she was running, she was not putting her daughter down for a single second. And on a Wednesday morning when the supply truck was due, she walked calmly toward the service door like a woman with somewhere reasonable to be. The guard was young. He looked genuinely pained about the whole thing. "I can't, Miss Adebayo. I'm sorry." She smiled at him like it was fine. She walked back inside. She revised the plan. The second attempt was quieter. Da-eun had become, in the way of people who share small spaces and honest eyes, something close to a friend. She brought Sienna extra fruit at breakfast and asked about Maya's drawings with what felt like real curiosity and never once made Sienna feel like a problem to be managed. So one afternoon, Sienna asked her quietly and carefully to call a car. Cash. No app. No record. Da-eun's face moved through something complicated and she nodded. The car was dispatched. It never arrived. The next morning, Da-eun brought Sienna tea and set it down and wouldn't meet her eyes. And Sienna understood without a single word being exchanged that kindness, in this compound, had a ceiling she simply hadn't known about until she hit it. She revised the plan again. The third attempt was the one that cost her something she hadn't expected to lose. On a Tuesday evening just before dusk, Sienna picked Maya up, settled her on her hip, and walked directly toward the main gate. No hesitation, no misdirection, no pretending to be going somewhere else. A straight line. Head up. The walk of a woman who had made a decision and was finished negotiating with herself about it. The guards saw her coming from a long way off. None of them moved. She reached the gate, her free hand wrapped around the iron bar, cold and solid and real, and she thought, "This is it, just push, just go." "Where will you go, Sienna?" She went still. His voice came from the path behind her. Not sharp, not threatening. Quietly, genuinely curious. The voice of a man asking a question he actually wanted answered. She turned around. Jae-won stood with his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't name then and would spend a long time trying to name later. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't pity. It was something that lived in the uncomfortable territory between the two. Like a man watching someone work through a problem he already knows the answer to, choosing, for reasons of his own, not to say it out loud. Maya looked at him from Sienna's hip. "Hi," Maya said, like they were running into each other at the grocery store. "Hi," Jae-won said back. His eyes stayed on Sienna's face. "Where will you go?" he said again. Softer the second time, almost gentle. And the real answer, not the defiant one, not the proud one, but the true one, opened up under Sienna like a trap door. There was nowhere to go that he couldn't find in 20 minutes. There was no backup plan that didn't lead directly back to the life that had already proven it couldn't protect them. No family waiting. No safety net. Nothing. She let go of the gate. She walked back past him without a word, without looking at him, without giving him a single thing he could read. She felt his eyes on her back the whole way to the door. And what kept her awake that night? What she turned over in the dark long after Maya's breathing had gone slow and even, was not the fact that he had stopped her. It was the fact that he hadn't needed to. Still with me? Good. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what would you have done at that gate? Because what happens next in that compound is something nobody, not even Sienna, saw coming. She painted because it was the only thing in the compound that belonged entirely to her. Not the bedroom, not the studio technically. The supplies were his, the space was his, the commission was his. But the moment brush met canvas, that part was hers. That had always been hers. And nobody, not even J10 with his biometric gates and his 14 cameras, could follow her in there. So she painted, and around the painting she built everything else. Maya woke at 7 every morning and Sienna was always up before her. No exceptions. No matter how late she had worked, no matter how deep she had gone into the canvas the night before, Maya would never open her eyes to an empty room. She would wake up to breakfast on the table and Sienna's face, and the quiet, unspoken message that the world was safe, and nothing had changed overnight that needed worrying about. Sienna made Maya's breakfast herself every morning. The staff had offered. She had declined politely and finally. This was not stubbornness. It was architecture. In a life stripped of her control, the small rituals of motherhood were the walls she rebuilt around her daughter every single day. A tutor named Soo-yeon came 3 mornings a week and sat with Maya in the garden with flashcards and picture books and infinite patience. Those were Sienna's hours. She used every minute of them. She painted fast and precisely and without sentiment, because the sooner the work was done, the sooner she would know what her life looked like on the other side of this. In the afternoons, she belonged to Maya completely. Garden walks, colour mixing on the stone steps. A beetle named Gerald, who lived in Maya's jacket pocket for one memorable afternoon before Sienna negotiated his release. Maya painted on large sheets spread across the garden tiles and narrated every brushstroke, and Sienna hung every single piece on the studio wall without hesitation. The first morning Jae-won walked into the kitchen while Maya was eating breakfast, the temperature shifted. Not dramatically. He simply entered, suit on, coffee in hand, moving through the space like a man who had never once adjusted himself to accommodate a room. And Maya looked up with the open curiosity of a child who had not yet learned that some people were not interested in being looked at. "Hi," Maya said. Jae-won looked at her, not warmly, not unkindly. The way you look at something that has been moved slightly from where you expected it. "Good morning," he said. Precise. Correct. Completely devoid of invitation. Then he turned to Sung-min in the doorway and resumed a conversation in rapid Korean that made clear, without a single rude word, that the kitchen had just become a workspace. Maya watched him for a moment. Then she looked at Sienna. Sienna handed her daughter the juice and kept her face perfectly neutral. Inside, something tightened. Not quite anger, not yet. Just a mother clocking a coldness directed near her child and filing it away without comment. It was never cruel. Jae-won was too controlled for cruelty toward a child. But whenever Maya wandered into a room he was in, his body language did the same thing every time. A slight straightening, a deliberate redirect, the stillness of a man enforcing a decision from the inside out. He acknowledged her when she spoke, briefly, correctly, then turned back to whatever he had been doing before she arrived. Maya kept speaking to him anyway. She had not been taught yet that some distances were meant to stay wide. Sienna watched from doorways and said nothing. Cold politeness she could work with. Cold politeness she could quietly protect her daughter from without a confrontation that would cost them both something. What she could not protect Maya from was being 5 years old and completely, fearlessly herself. 3 weeks in, Sienna came around the corner of the east corridor and stopped. Jae-won was on the phone near the garden entrance, low, rapid Korean, clearly serious. Maya was sitting on the bottom step 4 feet away, sketchpad on her knees, drawing something and narrating it softly to herself. She had simply arrived, the way Maya arrived everywhere and set up her operation without announcement. Jae-won glanced at her once, did the thing he always did, that slight turn away, that deliberate redirect. Maya looked up at the back of his head, looked back at her drawing, then said, to no one in particular, in the conversational tone of someone sharing a weather observation, "The sun looks sad today. I think it misses someone." She went back to drawing. Jae-won's voice paused on the phone, half a second, so brief that if Sienna hadn't been watching for exactly that kind of thing, she would have missed it entirely. Then he continued. His back stayed turned. Nothing about him looked any different. But that pause. Sienna went back to the studio, picked up her brush, stood in front of the canvas without seeing it for a long moment. A wall is still a wall even when it has one very small crack in it. She painted. He came to the studio every morning now. He brought 2 coffees. Exactly half a spoon of sugar in hers. Figured out over 4 days without being told. They worked in silence that had stopped feeling hostile weeks ago, and neither of them talked about what it had started feeling like instead. Maya kept chipping away, showing him drawings with the expectant confidence of someone who had decided he was part of her landscape and saw no reason to ask permission about that. Telling him about Gerald, asking his favorite color with great seriousness. When he said he didn't have one, she looked at him like that was the saddest thing she'd ever heard and announced she would figure it out for him. He didn't smile, but something at the very edge of his expression, that place where the controlled surface met whatever lived underneath, shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Sienna noticed. She said nothing. She kept that observation like all the others locked safely behind her back teeth. One evening she came to collect Maya from the garden and found her on the stone steps next to Jae-won. Jacket off, sleeves pushed back, sitting, which she had never seen him do outside of a formal chair, with Maya's sketchpad open across both their laps. Maya was explaining why the sun in her drawing had a face and what emotion it was expressing today, which was apparently the feeling you get when you find something you lost but didn't know you were looking for. Jae-won was looking at the drawing with the same quality of attention he gave his gallery paintings. Real attention. Not performance. He looked up and saw Sienna in the doorway. Something crossed his face and was gone. She called Maya in. Maya patted his arm in farewell like a small dignified diplomat concluding a summit and walked inside. Jae-won looked at his arm after she left. At the small warm place her hand had been, with the expression of a man encountering something he had no existing category for. Then he looked at Sienna. Neither of them spoke. She went inside. That night, after Maya was tucked in, 2 blankets, bare on the left, lamp on its lowest setting, Sienna painted until the city went quiet. She cleaned her brushes at 1:30 and heard the rooftop door open above her. She told herself she was going up for air. Seoul blazed below, indifferent and magnificent, and she stood at the railing and breathed and told herself she was clear and fine and completely in control. She had almost convinced herself when she heard footsteps and turned and Jae-won was there. He looked for the first time like a man who had not entirely planned his next move. He walked to the railing and stood beside her. The city breathed below. The silence between them was warm and full and alive, in a way silence between 2 people only becomes when something has already been decided, even if neither person has said it out loud yet. And then Sienna started talking, really talking, about her mother, about the painting her mother abandoned, about being 19 and alone in a city that didn't know her name and building something careful and invisible and wondering sometimes if she had made herself invisible along with it. Jae-won listened completely. Then he talked too. About his brother. About inheriting an empire at 23 built for someone else. About the painting he had spent 5 years searching for because his brother had loved it, and loving what the people you've lost had loved was sometimes the only language grief had left. The city burned below them. At some point, the space between them at the railing closed without either one deciding to close it. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him. His hand rose slowly, slow enough to be a question, and came to rest, warm against the side of her face. She closed her eyes. 1 second. 2. She stepped back. Don't, she said. Not because she didn't want to. He knew that. The knowing was written through him quietly and completely. Okay, he said, soft as a door easing shut. Just that one word, and nothing else. She went downstairs, checked on Maya first, always Maya first, stood over her sleeping daughter until her own heartbeat came back to something manageable, then sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hand to her cheek where his warmth was already fading. She was not in control of this situation. The next morning was sharp edges and careful distances. Maya looked from one to the other and back again with quiet, 5-year-old perceptiveness. Then went back to her drawing without comment. She was, Sienna thought, the most emotionally intelligent person in the compound by a considerable margin. 2 days of careful quiet. Then Jaewon told her she was attending a gala with him that evening. Da-yoon sat with Maya. Sienna laid out pajamas, left the note under the pillow, kissed her daughter's forehead, and walked out carrying the specific ache of every parent who has ever had to leave their child in someone else's hands and simply trust. The dress was midnight blue and perfectly fitted, and she told herself firmly it meant nothing that it was exactly right. The gathering was 48 floors up, Seoul blazing below, old money and political power filling the room with the particular confidence of people who had never once in their lives had to be invisible. Within 20 minutes, Sienna had been asked twice how long she had been working for Mr. O. The second time, she smiled at the woman asking and said pleasantly, "About as long as it took me to notice that most of the art on these walls is worth considerably less than the frames holding it." The woman's smile held its shape. Everything behind it recalibrated completely. Later, a man cornered her near the window with a comment in Korean about her being decorative, confident she wouldn't catch it. She caught every syllable. She was building her response when Jaewon appeared at her side and turned and looked at the man with the quality of stillness that makes a room understand, without a single word, that whatever was happening is now finished. The man found somewhere else to be. "I was handling it," Sienna said. "I know," Jaewon said. "Then why?" "Because I didn't want to watch anymore." Simple. Flat. The statement of a man who had stopped pretending. He looked out at Seoul and gave her nothing else. 7 words. She turned them over the entire ride home. The city moved past in ribbons of light. The silence in the back of the car was warm and full. She was just beginning to feel the evening soften when Sungmin's phone lit up. He answered on the first ring. 4 seconds of listening. Then he turned in his seat with an expression she had never seen on him. Not panic, but something tight and alert, and moving very fast underneath a controlled surface. "Sir." 1 word. The atmosphere of the car shifted like pressure dropping before a storm. "How many?" Jaewon said. "Completely even." Sungmin held up 4 fingers. Jaewon turned to Sienna. Calm, terrifyingly calm. "Slide down in your seat. Right now." "What is—" Sienna. Just her name. Quiet and absolute. Her hands moved before her mind finished deciding. She slid down and the city lights disappeared, and above her was only the car ceiling and her own heartbeat and Jaewon's voice low and rapid, and then the car ahead stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Hard. Diagonal. Blocking both lanes completely. What happens in the next 60 seconds changes everything. Their driver hit the brakes and the car lurched forward and Sienna's shoulder slammed against the door, and above her Jae-won's voice had shifted into something she had never heard from him before. Rapid, commanding, stripped of every social layer down to pure operational authority. He was on his phone before the car finished skidding. Sung-min was already out of the passenger seat. And then Jae-won moved. He turned and covered her, not roughly, not in panic, but with the swift, decisive certainty of a man who had already decided, long before this moment arrived, exactly what he was going to do when it did. His body came over hers, one arm braced against the door beside her head, his weight a shield between her and the windows and whatever was outside them. His face was inches from hers. She could feel him breathing, controlled, steady, completely unlike her own breathing, which had stopped being either of those things entirely. "Look at me," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Don't look at the windows. Keep your eyes on me." Outside there were voices, movement, the sound of Sung-min's door and then other doors, and Sienna understood with a clarity that bypassed thought entirely that the world Jae-won-oh lived in had edges she had only ever glimpsed from a safe distance, and right now every single one of those edges was pressed up against the glass, 12 inches from her face. She kept her eyes on him. He held her gaze the entire time, not checking the windows, not tracking what was happening outside, watching her face with a focus so complete and deliberate that she understood, somewhere beneath the fear, exactly what he was doing. He was giving her something to hold on to. He was making himself the fixed point in a world that was spinning. She grabbed that fixed point and held on with everything she had. She counted 1, 2, 3. All the way to 240 seconds of Sung-min's voice, outside moving from sharp to commanding to something lower and more final. Then silence. Real silence. The kind that comes after something rather than before it. "Clear," Sung-min said. Jae-won didn't move immediately. He stayed exactly where he was for one more second, face close to hers, arm still braced beside her head. And in that second, something crossed his expression that he didn't have time to put away before she saw it. It wasn't relief. It was rawer than relief. It was the unguarded expression of a man who had just been shown, against his will and without warning, exactly how much something mattered to him. He pulled back, straightened his jacket. "Are you hurt?" Sienna sat up slowly. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "No." He looked at her hands anyway. He saw. He said nothing about it. "Who were they?" she asked. "People who want something I have." "Am I something you have?" The question sat between them in the quiet of the car, honest and sharp and slightly too real for the space they were in. Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. "Tonight you were something I was protecting," he said carefully. "There's a difference." "Is there?" she said quietly. He didn't answer. The car started moving and Seoul closed back around them and Sienna sat with her trembling hands pressed flat against her thighs and stared out the window and tried to sort through everything she was feeling. The fear, the adrenaline, the unsettling warmth of having been covered and held and kept by someone who had no obligation to do any of it gently. She couldn't sort through it. It was too tangled. She left it alone. Back at the compound, the first thing she did was check on Maya. Da-eun was awake. Something in the late energy of the returning cars had stirred her, and she looked at Sienna's face with wide eyes and opened her mouth. Sienna shook her head slightly. "Not now." Da-eun nodded and slipped out quietly, and Sienna stood alone in the doorway of her daughter's room and watched Maya sleep, deeply, safely, perfectly untouched by everything that had just happened outside these walls. She stood there for a long time. When she finally turned around, Jae-won was in the corridor. Not close, just there, leaning against the opposite wall with his hands in his pockets, watching her with that expression she was slowly learning to read, the one that only appeared when he forgot, briefly, to keep it in. "She's fine," Sienna said quietly. I know, he said. I had someone check the moment we turned onto that road. Sienna stared at him. Before you even knew how it was going to go? You already had someone checking on her? He said nothing. He didn't need to. She looked at him standing in that corridor, 28 years old, the most dangerous and complicated person she had ever been in a room with, who had thrown his body over hers without hesitation and checked on her daughter before the threat had even resolved. And felt something in her chest give way. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a quiet giving way. Like a door that has been held shut for a long time, finally easing off its latch. She didn't say anything about it. She went to bed. She curled around Maya's small, warm, sleeping body and stared at the ceiling, and somewhere between one breath and the next, she stopped making plans to leave. Not forever. Not out loud. Just tonight. Just for now. The morning after the ambush, everything was different, and neither of them acknowledged it. Jae-won came to the studio, brought 2 coffees, sat in his chair, opened his folder. Sienna painted. The silence between them had changed again, softer this time, worn in, like something that had been washed enough times to finally feel comfortable. Maya came in mid-morning with a drawing she wanted to show Jae-won specifically. She walked directly to his chair and held it up in front of his face with both hands. He looked at it. Not the brief, correct glance of obligation. He actually looked, taking in the colours, the shapes, the earnest, ambitious chaos of it. Then he said with the careful precision of a man choosing his words like he chose everything else, "The blue here. That's a good choice." Maya beamed like he had handed her the sun. "I picked it for you," she said, "because I figured out your favourite colour. It's dark blue, like your car and your good jacket and the mug you use every morning." Something happened to Jae-won's face in that moment. Something small and irreversible, like a lock turning over that had been frozen shut for years. He looked at this 5-year-old who had spent weeks quietly paying attention to him while he was busy keeping his distance, who had catalogued his preferences with the devoted thoroughness of someone who had simply decided he mattered. And for just a moment, just one unguarded, undefended moment, he had absolutely no composure left. "You're right," he said quietly. "That is my favourite colour." Maya nodded like this confirmed everything she had suspected and went back to her own work. Jae-won looked down at his folder. Sienna looked at her canvas. Neither of them said a single word about what had just happened in that room. But the painting Sienna made that afternoon was the best work she had done since she arrived. She didn't understand why until later that night when she was cleaning her brushes and realized she had stopped painting with her jaw clenched. She had stopped bracing. She had spent 3 weeks holding the compound at arm's length, holding him at arm's length. And today, without deciding to, she had simply let go of the arm. The replica was finished 4 days later. She completed the final brushstroke at 3 a.m. and stepped back and looked at what she had made. It was extraordinary. Even she knew that, and Sienna was not a woman who complimented herself easily. The painting existed in the room like a living thing, breathing, carrying the full weight of the lost original in every layer of colour and texture and deliberate aged imperfection. She had poured everything into it, her skill, her history, 3 weeks of a life she hadn't chosen and couldn't quite bring herself to regret. She called Jae-won. He arrived in 10 minutes in a dark shirt, with his hair not yet in order. The first time she had ever seen him look like he had been pulled from sleep rather than simply deciding to be awake. He stood in front of the painting for a very long time. The studio was quiet. The city outside was at its lowest ebb, that particular 3 a.m. silence when Seoul finally briefly exhales. "It's done," Sienna said. "Yes," he said. He was still looking at the painting. Then he turned to her. And whatever he had come in here prepared to say, whatever the transaction was supposed to look like at this moment, the formal conclusion of the arrangement, the clean, professional ending to a situation that had stopped being clean or professional approximately 3 weeks ago. He looked at her face and didn't say any of it. You can leave today. The car will take you wherever you want to go. Your lease is paid for 6 months. He was looking at the painting when he said it. Not at her. His jaw was tight. His hands were still. He was a man holding something closed with everything he had and doing it very well, and she could see it anyway. Sienna looked at him. At the painting. At Maya, who had crept in sometime in the last hour and fallen asleep on the studio sofa with her shoes still on and her sketch pad open on her chest, one hand still loosely holding a blue crayon. She thought about her apartment, the peeling walls, the silent nights, the particular loneliness of building a life so invisible that sometimes you forgot you were living it. She thought about the gate she had let go of, about a rooftop and a hand against her face like a question she hadn't been ready to answer, about a man who checked on her daughter before a road had even cleared, about a 5-year-old who had cracked a locked door with nothing but persistence and a theory about someone's favourite colour. She walked to the sofa, crouched down beside Maya. Baby, wake up a second. Maya stirred, blinking. Is the painting done? Yes. Is it beautiful? Yes. Maya considered this with the gravity it deserved. Are we going home now? Sienna looked at her daughter's face, that open, trusting, completely unafraid face, and felt the answer arrive not as a decision but as a recognition, like something that had been true for a while and was only now being said out loud. I don't know yet, baby. Go back to sleep. Maya closed her eyes obligingly. Sienna stood. She turned to face Jaewon, who had finally turned to face her. And he looked, in this moment, more unguarded than she had ever seen him. More uncertain, more human. 28 years old and the most controlled person she had ever met. And he was standing in his own studio at 3 a.m., looking at her like a man who had run completely out of strategies. I'm not staying because I have nowhere to go, she said clearly. I want that understood. Something moved through him, relief and disbelief arriving together, neither quite winning. Understood, he said, a beat. Then, for what it's worth, I would have let you go, even if... He stopped. Even if what? He looked at her for a long, completely undefended moment. Even if it would have been the hardest thing I've ever done. The silence after that was not empty. It was full of everything they had not yet said, of all the time they now had to say it, of a 5-year-old asleep on a sofa with a blue crayon in her hand, who had, in her own quiet, relentless way, dismantled a wall that had taken years to build. Sienna looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them looked away. So, she said finally, quietly, almost a smile. What happens now? Jaewon. Oh, crime lord, the most dangerous person in every room he had ever entered, a man who had not been uncertain about anything in 5 years, looked at her and said honestly, I have no idea. And Sienna laughed. A real one. Surprised out of her. Warm and genuine and completely unguarded. The first real laugh since she had arrived in this compound. It filled the studio and bounced off the canvases, and Maya stirred slightly on the sofa and resettled without waking, and the city outside began, almost imperceptibly, to lighten toward dawn. Jaewon watched her laugh. And the thing that happened to his face in that moment, the thing that came up through all that control and composure and careful constructed distance like light coming through a crack, was so unambiguous and so complete that Sienna felt it land in her chest like an answer to a question she had stopped letting herself ask. Some mornings later, after the compound had begun to feel like a place where she lived rather than a place where she was kept, after Maya had extracted a promise from Jaewon to teach her 5 more Korean words before the week was out, after Sienna had started a new canvas with no commission attached and no one else's vision directing her hand. She stood at the studio window with her coffee and looked out at Seoul in the early morning light. The city was all gold and shadow and motion, and Somewhere below it, the Han River moved the way it always moved. Steadily, indifferently, carrying everything downstream without being diminished by any of it. Da-eun appeared in the doorway. "He's asking if you want breakfast." "Tell him yes," Sienna said. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. Da-eun smiled, small, private, the smile of someone who had been watching something unfold for weeks and was deeply satisfied by how it had landed. She left. Sienna turned back to the window. She picked up her brush. The canvas was blank and waiting and entirely hers, and she had no idea yet what she was going to put on it, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, that uncertainty felt not like a threat, but like a door standing open. She began. And that, right there, is where Sienna Adebayo's story stops being about survival. 3 years in a city that didn't know her name. 3 weeks in a compound she couldn't leave. One man who covered her in the dark and checked on her daughter before the danger had even passed. One 5-year-old who dismantled a wall with nothing but a blue crayon and a theory. Sienna came to Seoul running. She stayed because somewhere between the gate she let go of and the rooftop she told the truth on, and the studio floor where 2 people finally sat at the same level. She stopped being afraid of being found. Some cages, it turns out, were never really locked. She just had to stop running long enough to notice the door had been open for a while. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below. Should she had stayed or walked out of the door? I read every single one. Until next time.